We're talking about a decorated Army Corps engineer who came home from Afghanistan to find an HOA had literally stolen his grandfather's farm and built 35 luxury homes on his land. But here's the twist. They had no idea he controlled a 45-year-old federal dam that could turn their McMansion paradise into lakefront property with the pull of a lever. This is the story of Jake Morrison, and trust me, you've never heard anything like this on HOA Unleashed before. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments because you're about to witness the most satisfying HOA takedown involving federal water law, military engineering, and good old-fashioned Texas justice. Let me set the stage for you. Jake Morrison, 34 years old, Army Corps of Engineers specialist, and third-generation owner of 47 pristine acres of Texas land just outside Austin. This isn't just any property. We're talking about land that Jake's grandfather, affectionately called Pops, bought back in 1955 when Austin was still a sleepy college town where barbecue joints outnumbered tech companies by about 1,000 to 1. Now, Pops was the kind of man who believed in taking care of both the land and the people on it. In 1978, he built a small earth dam on the property. Nothing fancy, just solid engineering designed to collect rainwater for the cattle and help out downstream neighbors during those brutal Texas dry spells. And here's the crucial detail that HOA Unleashed viewers need to understand. The Army Corps of Engineers helped Pops with the design. That's going to be important later. Pops always told Jake that someday the back 40 acres would be worth something special, but for now it was just beautiful rolling hills where they ran cattle and Jake learned to hunt. Those were simpler times before HOAS turned neighborly disputes into federal cases. Then came Jake's military service. 2 tours in Afghanistan where he specialized in water management and infrastructure. And let me tell you, building wells and managing water flow in a war zone teaches you exactly how precious clean water really is, and more importantly, how quickly people will fight over it. That knowledge was about to become very, very relevant. While Jake was on his second deployment, serving our country, tragedy struck. Pops passed away. The property went into a trust managed by Jake's well-meaning but completely overwhelmed sister Sarah, who lives in California and knows about as much about Texas land law as most of us know about rocket science. Sarah hired a local property management company called Loner Land Services to handle the taxes and upkeep. The property taxes got paid automatically, but here's where things went sideways. Sarah never actually looked at the tax assessment. Big mistake. Huge mistake. Enter our villain, and folks, we've covered some real pieces of work here on HOA Unleashed. But Margaret Maggie Thornwell takes the cake. 52 years old, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, and the kind of woman who drives a white BMW X7 and treats tennis outfits like business attire. Maggie's got that particular brand of passive-aggressive sweetness that certain people perfect around middle age. You know the type. They'll smile while they're stabbing you in the back and somehow make it sound like they're doing you a favor. But here's what makes this story perfect for HOA Unleashed. Maggie's married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell. That should tell you everything you need to know about how she gets things done. She's got a reputation for neighborhood beautification initiatives, which is HOA speak for forcing out anyone who doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. According to Jake, the smell of her expensive perfume couldn't quite mask the stench of cigarette smoke and entitlement that followed her around like a toxic cloud. So Jake comes home from deployment in August 2023, finally ready to spend some real time on Pop's land. Picture this. He's driving down that familiar gravel road, past the old oak tree where he'd carved his initials as a kid, expecting to see the same rolling pastures and that little earth dam sparkling in the Texas sun. Instead, he finds construction crews, concrete trucks, and survey stakes scattered across his back 40 like some kind of suburban invasion. The crunch of gravel under his boots felt different somehow, angrier. Jake could taste the dust and his own rising fury as he marched up to the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," the foreman said, not looking sorry at all. "We got permits and everything. This is Willowbrook Estates property now. Can you imagine? You serve your country overseas and you come home to find someone's building McMansions on your family land. This is exactly the kind of HOA overreach we expose here on HOA Unleashed." Jake called the police immediately. Officer Martinez showed up and explained with obvious discomfort that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while Jake was overseas. For those who don't know, adverse possession is when someone can claim ownership of land if nobody's actively using it for a certain period, and they can prove they've been improving it. It's an old law designed to prevent land from sitting empty forever, but it's become a favorite weapon of developers and power-hungry HOAs looking to expand their empires. That's when Maggie made her grand entrance, riding up in her little golf cart like some kind of suburban warlord. Her voice had that syrupy sweetness that immediately made Jake want to check his wallet. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, smiling like she was doing him a favor. "We're just putting it to good use for the community." But here's what really got Jake's blood boiling, and what should outrage every HOA Unleashed viewer. He discovered that Maggie's construction crews had diverted the small creek that fed Pops's dam. The water level was dropping every single day, and with it, 45 years of careful water management that had helped their neighbors through droughts, floods, and everything in between. As Jake stood there watching the water level drop, Maggie's parting shot echoed in his ears. "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." That's when Jake knew this wasn't just about land. This was war. And fortunately for justice, and for all of us watching this story unfold on HOA Unleashed, Jake Morrison was exactly the right person to fight it. Jake hired the first attorney he could find. Big mistake. This guy quoted him $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change. Turns out while Jake was serving his country, Maggie's husband Rick had pushed through an emergency zoning modification. Jake's family land went from agricultural preservation to residential development zone faster than you can say conflict of interest. But here's where Jake's Army Corps training came in handy, and where this story gets really good for HOA Unleashed viewers. While that overpriced lawyer was shuffling papers and billing hours, Jake was digging through county records like he was hunting for IEDs. And just like in Afghanistan, the devil was in the details. Jake found Pops's original 1978 dam construction permits, and they were absolutely beautiful. See, Pops didn't just build that dam himself. He worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control and watershed management. That meant federal jurisdiction. And here's your first knowledge bomb from HOA Unleashed. Any dam built with federal guidance creates federal jurisdiction that local HOAs cannot override. Period. Let me repeat that for the HOA board members who might be watching. Cannot override. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit Jake's tongue as he realized what he'd found. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a federal case. But wait, it gets even better. While Jake was photocopying permits at the courthouse, he stumbled across a 1923 water rights deed buried in the old records. His great-grandfather had purchased senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city, older than the county's municipal water system, older than every single one of those McMansions sitting on his land. They weren't just stealing his property, they were stealing his water. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy playing the victim. A classic HOA president move that we've seen countless times here on HOA Unleashed. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam structure, complete with a local news crew she'd obviously tipped off in advance. Jake watched her on the evening news, standing in front of her perfectly manicured lawn, talking about children's safety and neighborhood security. "We're just concerned about our children's safety," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." The funny thing about local news is they love a good story, but they're not always great with follow-up research. If they'd bothered to check, they would have found that Jake's dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. But Maggie wasn't done. She posted on the Nextdoor app. You know, that digital neighborhood watch where HOA presidents go to flex their petty authority. Her post warned about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She never mentioned Jake's name, but she didn't have to. In a community that small, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with cedar pollen hung heavy in the August air as Jake stood on his front porch each evening, watching their construction crews work double shifts. They were racing to finish those houses before he could get any kind of legal injunction. Every night, Jake counted new foundation pours. Every night, the water level in Pops's dam dropped another inch. That's when Jake called his old Army buddy Tony Riggs, who now works for the EPA Enforcement Division. 20 minutes on the phone with Tony taught Jake more about environmental law than 3 hours with that expensive attorney. Jake, Tony said, if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And if your dam has federal jurisdiction, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake started documenting everything. Trail cameras around the property perimeter, timestamp photos of every water diversion, flow measurements at 3 different points along the creek. His sister Sarah called from California, begging him to just take the money and walk away. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the crunch of gravel under construction boots that had no business being on his land. It was about the sound of Maggie's heels clicking across courthouse marble during zoning hearings that should never have happened. It was about the bitter taste of courthouse coffee during research sessions that revealed just how deep this corruption went. But most of all, it was about that dam. Pops built it to help the community during dry spells. For 45 years, it had been a source of life for neighbors downstream. Maggie's crew was turning it into a decorative pond for McMansions. Here's something every HOA Unleashed viewer needs to understand about water rights in Texas. They're older than oil rights, older than mineral rights, and a hell of a lot harder to steal. But you have to know how to fight for them. As Jake stood there watching another concrete truck rumble past his kitchen window, he realized something important. This wasn't going to be won in a courtroom with expensive lawyers and legal briefs. This was going to be won with engineering. Maggie decided to turn up the heat with tactics we've seen from power-hungry HOA boards across the country. She organized what she called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polo shirts who parked at Jake's property entrance like some kind of suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, wrote down license plates, and filed reports with the sheriff about suspicious activity. The harassment campaign was textbook HOA intimidation. Loud music complaints when Jake ran his radio during farm work. Unsightly structures, citations for his perfectly functional farmhouse that had been standing since 1962. Environmental hazards reports about his septic system that had passed inspection just 6 months earlier. But the real kick in the teeth came when Rick used his city council position to order a wellness check on Jake through veteran services. Apparently, Jake was a troubled veteran who might be struggling with readjustment issues. The social worker who showed up was apologetic but thorough. She had to check boxes on her clipboard while Maggie watched from her golf cart like she was supervising a military inspection. That's when the coordinated bureaucratic assault began. Another classic move we've documented extensively here on HOA Unleashed. Building inspector, fire marshal, health department, and animal control all showed up on the same day like some kind of regulatory SWAT team. Each one found minor violations requiring expensive corrections. The building inspector, who happened to be a drinking buddy of Rick's, declared that Jake's front porch needed $8,000 in foundation work. Jake recognized the squeeze play immediately. It's the same tactic they use in war zones to pressure local officials. Overwhelm them with bureaucracy until they give up and cooperate. But 2 can play that game. While they were drowning Jake in paperwork, he was making some phone calls of his own. Tony Riggs at the EPA was very interested to learn that Maggie's HOA had never filed the required wetlands assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. Turns out any development that redirects natural waterways requires federal environmental clearance, even on private property. And the fines for violations start at $50,000 per day. The smell of fresh concrete curing in the summer heat reminded Jake every morning that he was running out of time. But his research was paying off in ways Maggie never expected. Jake discovered that their entire development had been built in what the Army Corps classified as a 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies had initially refused coverage until the HOA provided a flood mitigation plan. Their solution: permanently divert Willow Creek away from the new homes and let it flood Jake's property instead. Here's your second knowledge bomb from HOA. Unleashed. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When developers lie about flood risks to get coverage, that's federal mail fraud. The deeper Jake dug, the more he realized this wasn't Maggie's first rodeo. Her previous HOA in Houston had paid a $2.3 million EPA fine for an identical creek diversion scheme. She'd left town just ahead of federal prosecutors and set up shop in Austin, looking for new victims. Meanwhile, Maggie was spreading rumors about Jake's mental health and violent tendencies. Sekrum. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on his military service and organized a petition demanding the city condemn his property as a public nuisance. "We have children playing in these neighborhoods," she told the local paper. "We can't have unstable individuals threatening our safety." But while she was busy playing the victim, Jake was building alliances. Exactly what we always recommend here on HOA Unleashed. He connected with other HOA victims through online forums and discovered a pattern. Maggie's HOA had absorbed 6 smaller properties through similar tactics over the past 3 years. Each time the story was the same: pressure, harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and mysterious zoning changes that always seemed to benefit Rick's construction company. Jake partnered with his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, whose family garden had withered since the creek diversion. He met Miguel Santos, whose family farm had been rezoned out of existence by Rick Thornwell 2 years earlier. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic land grab that had been going on for years. The vibration of heavy machinery through Jake's farmhouse floorboards became a daily reminder of what he was fighting for. Every morning, he watched concrete trucks rumble past his kitchen window. Every evening, he documented the water theft that was slowly killing Pops' dam. But Jake was also preparing. He installed water flow meters at the dam outlet and creek diversion points. He calculated the exact volume of water being stolen, 1,200 gallons per day, worth $47,000 annually in agricultural water rights. The gritty texture of sand between Jake's fingers as he tested creek bed sediment told the story better than any lawyer could. This wasn't just theft. It was environmental destruction on a massive scale. And then Jake got the certified letter that changes everything in this HOA Unleashed story. The city was planning to seize his property through eminent domain for public safety. The hearing was scheduled in just 2 weeks. Maggie's quote in the paper made her strategy crystal clear. "Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself." But as Jake stood at his bedroom window that night, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, he realized something important. Those weren't just rain clouds building up. They were opportunity. Maggie went nuclear with tactics that would make any HOA Unleashed viewer's blood boil. Rick fast-tracked an eminent domain hearing scheduled for just 2 weeks out. Suddenly, the HOA was offering Jake $180,000 for property assessed at $890,000. The message was clear: take the lowball offer or lose everything. The local newspaper ran a hit piece that made Jake sound like some kind of domestic terrorist. "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Progress" was the headline, complete with a photo that somehow made his farmhouse look like a crack den and Jake look like he hadn't slept in weeks. But Maggie's masterstroke was the photo op. She staged it perfectly. 20 concerned mothers holding children near Jake's property line with a professional photographer capturing their worried faces while his farmhouse loomed menacingly in the background. The Facebook post went viral with the hashtag #ProtectOurKids. "Our children deserve safe neighborhoods," she told the Channel 7 news crew, "not whatever issues he brought back from war." You know what? She was right about one thing. Jake did bring something back from war. He brought back the ability to recognize when someone's trying to steamroll you with propaganda and the engineering skills to do something about it. Tony Riggs called with information that changed everything. The EPA had already opened a federal investigation into Willow Creek diversions, based on Jake's initial complaint. But here's the kicker. Maggie's previous HOA in Houston had faced that $2.3 million fine for the exact same scheme. Federal environmental crimes follow individuals even when they move to new jurisdictions. While Maggie was playing the victim on social media, Jake was discovering that her entire financial house of cards was built on fraud. The HOA's construction loans were tied to inflated property values, and the banks had required guaranteed water access for loan approval. If those water rights reverted back to Jake, their rightful owner, the entire development would become financially underwater. The taste of bitter irony wasn't lost on Jake. They'd stolen his water to make their land valuable, and now their own greed was going to drown them. Maggie's panic was starting to show. She offered Jake $400,000 cash, no questions asked, 48-hour deadline. When he refused, she flew to California to approach his sister Sarah with some sob story about her brother's mental health issues. That backfired spectacularly. Sarah might not know Texas land law, but she knows her brother. She called Jake laughing. "Jake, some crazy woman in tennis clothes just offered to help with my troubled veteran brother. I told her if she contacts our family again, I'm calling the FBI." But while Maggie was busy making enemies, Jake was making allies. He partnered with environmental lawyer Amanda Cross, who specialized in pro bono water rights cases. Together, they formed a coalition with downstream farmers who'd been affected by the creek diversion. Miguel Santos brought historical documentation showing his family had used creek water for farming since 1887. Mrs. Chen provided photographs of her grandfather's garden from the 1940s, fed by the same creek that was now feeding Maggie's decorative water features. The local Audubon Society was particularly interested to learn that the creek diversion had destroyed critical nesting habitat for several protected bird species. Turns out killing protected wildlife while committing water theft tends to get federal attention real fast. During Jake's nighttime reconnaissance, old habits from the Army, he discovered something beautiful. Pops's dam wasn't just a simple earthwork structure. The original 1978 design included an emergency spillway system with hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1982. The hollow echo of water flowing through those underground spillway channels during Jake's midnight test told him everything he needed to know. The mechanism was still functional, and it was designed for exactly this situation: controlled flooding to restore natural water flow patterns. Jake calculated the water volume needed to restore Willow Creek to its original path, 2.8 million gallons. The dam was currently holding 3.1 million gallons thanks to recent rainfall. The math was perfect, but the timing had to be precise. Using his drone for aerial reconnaissance, Jake mapped the exact locations of those new home foundations relative to the original creek bed. 5 houses were built directly in the historical flood channel. 3 more had basements below the seasonal high water mark. Here's the beautiful part that makes this perfect for HOA Unleashed. The construction crews had installed decorative creek beds using concrete and decorative stones. They looked pretty, but they weren't designed to handle actual water flow. Meanwhile, Jake's spillway system was engineered by the Army Corps specifically for flood management. Then Maggie made her biggest mistake. Her crew began installing permanent concrete barriers to completely block the original creek bed. This would make Jake's spillway system useless and permanently destroy the downstream ecosystem. But it also gave him the perfect justification for what he was about to do. The Weather Service was predicting heavy September rains, perfect seasonal cover for emergency dam maintenance. As Jake stood at those spillway controls at sunset, reading Pop's journal entry about helping neighbors during droughts, the decision crystallized. Time to open the gates. While digging through dusty courthouse records for the 3rd time that week, Jake found a misfiled document that changed everything. Buried behind a stack of 1979 tax assessments was the original agricultural flood management covenant from Pops's dam construction. The language was beautiful in its simplicity. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission to manage flooding, it was a legal obligation that superseded any HOA agreements or city ordinances. Amanda Cross's investigation uncovered something even more damaging. The HOA's insurance applications contained flat-out lies. They'd claimed no seasonal flooding risk and permanent creek diversion approved by all agencies to secure $47 million in coverage. Here's your 3rd knowledge bomb from HOA Unleashed. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When you lie to insurance companies about environmental risks, that's federal mail fraud with mandatory prison time. The deeper they dug, the more the whole scheme unraveled. Rick Thornwell's construction company wasn't just the contractor for the HOA development, he was the primary investor. Every house built on Jake's stolen land put money directly in Rick's pocket. And here's the kicker. He'd never recused himself from a single city council vote that benefited his project. Tony Riggs shared EPA findings that made Jake's blood boil. The creek diversion had killed the entire population of Guadalupe bass. a protected species that had thrived in Willow Creek for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had documented the fish kill, but somehow the report got lost in Rick's office before it could trigger federal prosecution. They weren't just stealing land and water. They were destroying an entire ecosystem. But the real smoking gun came from Amanda's banking contacts. The construction loans were secured by fraudulent environmental assessments that claimed the creek diversion was a temporary construction measure. Banks were told the water would be returned to its natural flow once construction was complete. If those water rights reverted to Jake, the entire development would violate federal lending regulations. The banks could demand immediate full repayment of $12 million in construction loans. That's when Jake found Pops's handwritten journals in the farmhouse attic. His 1980 entry broke Jake's heart. Open spillway today helped the Santos farm and 3 others get through dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam was never about their family's profit. It was about community service, helping downstream neighbors survive droughts and managing floods to protect everyone in the watershed. Reading those journals, Jake realized what Maggie had really stolen. It wasn't just land or water. It was 45 years of community cooperation that his grandfather had built one neighbor at a time. Jake's engineering analysis confirmed what he'd suspected. Maggie's creek diversion was creating an upstream flooding hazard. During heavy rains, the redirected water would back up into residential areas. The original creek bed had provided natural flood control for the entire watershed, and Jake's spillway system was the only way to safely manage seasonal flooding. The timeline pressure was crushing. September rains were predicted to be the heaviest in 7 years. If Jake waited for the legal system to grind through appeals and federal investigations, natural flooding would happen anyway, potentially causing real property damage. But if he acted now, he could control the timing and intensity. A controlled spillway release would demonstrate natural flood patterns without endangering anyone, while proving that the HOA development violated federal environmental law. Standing at those spillway controls at sunset, holding Pops's journal, the moral clarity hit Jake like lightning. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring the natural order that had sustained this community for generations. Maggie had systematically destroyed the local farming community. Miguel Santos lost his family's century-old farm. Mrs. Chen's ancestral garden withered without creek water. 3 other families were forced to sell generational properties to Rick's eminent domain schemes. But federal environmental investigators were scheduled to visit next month. Perfect timing. If Jake could demonstrate natural flood patterns before their inspection, it would prove the HOA development violated multiple federal laws. The musty smell of old hydraulic fluid in the dam control mechanisms reminded Jake that this equipment was built to last. Pops had designed it for exactly this moment, when someone would need to stand up for the creek and the community that depended on it. As storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Jake made the decision that would change everything. Time to honor Pops's legacy and open those gates. You don't just open a dam without a plan. This wasn't revenge. It was a military operation with legal cover, environmental justification, and community support. First, Jake assembled his team. Amanda Cross coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention when the spillway opened. Tony Riggs provided federal cover, guaranteeing that EPA investigators would witness what he called their natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos documented 40 years of downstream agricultural damage, providing historical testimony about seasonal flooding patterns that proved the creek diversion was destroying generational farming operations. Mrs. Chen offered her property as a staging area and brought credibility as the community's most respected longtime resident. Amanda's legal strategy was brilliant. She filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion, arguing that the dam covenant legally required Jake to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream agriculture. They weren't breaking the law, they were following it. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget for HOA Unleashed viewers. Agricultural water rights often supersede residential development rights, especially when you have historical documentation proving prior use. The key is having ironclad paperwork that predates any development claims. Jake's technical preparation was pure Army Corps engineering. He created detailed spillway operation plans with precise calculations. Controlled release starting at 6 a.m. Gradual increase over 4 hours, peak flow at 10 a.m. The water volume was calculated to demonstrate natural flooding patterns without causing structural damage to anything except Maggie's illegal concrete barriers. Safety was paramount. Jake posted warning signs 24 hours in advance and personally notified the volunteer fire department. This wasn't some reckless flood. It was a carefully controlled demonstration of how water naturally wanted to flow. Amanda contacted environmental reporters from the Austin American-Statesman and local TV stations. Miguel arranged for community members to witness the agricultural water restoration. The strategy was simple: control the narrative before Maggie could spin it as dangerous veteran terrorizes neighborhood. Their intelligence network was straight out of a spy novel. Mrs. Chen monitored HOA activity through the neighborhood gossip network. Never underestimate little old ladies with time on their hands. The local diner waitress, who happened to be Miguel's cousin, reported on city council closed-door meetings. Jake's army buddy at Fort Hood provided surveillance drone support for legal documentation. While Jake was rebuilding spillway controls with modern hydraulic systems, Amanda was waging financial warfare. She contacted insurance companies with evidence of fraudulent applications, arranged for banking regulators to review construction loan documentation, and prepared whistleblower complaints about Rick's conflicts of interest. The beauty was in the timing coordination. Weather Service confirmed heavy rains in 72 hours. Amanda scheduled federal environmental inspection for the same week. Miguel arranged for the agricultural extension agent to document downstream benefits. A perfect storm of natural weather, federal oversight, and community support, all converging at exactly the right moment. But Jake knew Maggie's psychology. She always escalated when pressured, so he prepared for her predictable responses: emergency HOA meeting, media smear campaign, probably a restraining order filed through her corrupt judge friend. Amanda drafted preemptive legal responses to each expected attack. The evidence preservation was crucial. Jake compiled comprehensive photo documentation of the current creek diversion, recorded video testimony from affected farmers and neighbors, and gathered historical photographs showing original creek bed and seasonal flooding patterns. Amanda secured everything in federal court filings for legal protection. Safety protocols included coordination with the volunteer fire department, communication with downstream residents, and detailed notices posted in English and Spanish. Jake even created an evacuation plan they wouldn't need, just to demonstrate responsible management. The economic warfare was Amanda's specialty. She tipped off state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, contacted the Texas Attorney General about insurance fraud evidence, and prepared a civil RICO lawsuit alleging a pattern of racketeering. Here's another knowledge nugget from HOA Unleashed. Coordinated regulatory pressure often forces settlement faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate simultaneously, defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the evening air as Jake serviced all dam equipment and tested spillway gates under minimal flow. Everything worked perfectly. Pops had built this system to last. Jake stocked the farmhouse with supplies for a potential siege, knowing Maggie would try everything to stop him. Amanda filed protective court orders preventing interference with lawful dam operations. They established secure communications using military-grade encrypted radio. As Jake stood at those controls for the final equipment check, watching storm clouds build on the horizon, everything felt aligned. Weather forecasts confirmed heavy rains in 48 hours. Federal investigators would arrive in 36 hours. Maggie was scheduled for her morning show appearance in 24 hours, probably planning another attack on Jake's character. The timing was perfect. Dawn tomorrow would bring justice and 45 years of stolen water back to where it belonged. Maggie's desperation reached new levels when she hired private security to patrol Jake's property perimeter. These weren't just rent-a-cops with flashlights. These were tactical gear wannabes who work private military contracts and think HOA disputes are combat zones. Jake's trail cameras caught them red-handed, trying to sabotage the spillway control mechanisms at 2 a.m. One genius was caught on video, attempting to jam concrete mix into the hydraulic lines while his buddy served as lookout. Tony Riggs had tipped off the sheriff's department, and Deputy Rodriguez was waiting in the shadows when they made their move. The arrest was beautiful. Mr. Tactical Vest claimed they were protecting community infrastructure from an unstable individual. But it's hard to explain why you're carrying a bag of quick-set concrete at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maggie's media blitz was even more desperate. She appeared on the Austin Morning Show wearing her Sunday best and speaking in that trembling voice politicians use when they want to look like victims. Veterans need mental health support, not weapons, she told the host, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. This man learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan, and now he's threatening to wash away children's homes. Rick provided expert testimony as a city engineer about catastrophic dam failure risks, conveniently forgetting to mention that Jake's dam had passed every safety inspection for 45 years. But while Maggie was playing victim on television, Jake's surveillance training was paying dividends. He documented every sabotage attempt, every illegal entry, every piece of evidence that would later prove criminal conspiracy. Tony revealed that federal investigators had been wiretapping Rick's office phone as part of an ongoing corruption probe. These people were more desperate than Jake had realized. The legal assault came next. Rick fast-tracked an emergency restraining order hearing for 6 a.m. the following morning, clearly hoping to catch them off guard. Judge Henry Walsh, Rick's golf buddy who'd received $15,000 in campaign contributions from Rick's construction company, agreed to hear the emergency public safety motion. Amanda discovered the corruption connection and immediately filed for Walsh's recusal, but they knew the fix was in. If they couldn't stop the spillway opening legally, they'd stop it through a corrupt judge. Meanwhile, Maggie organized a neighborhood safety patrol to physically surround Jake's property. 20 HOA residents showed up with folding chairs, coolers, and "Protect Our Kids" signs, planning to live stream the spillway opening as environmental terrorism. The optics were perfect for her narrative. Suburban families with children versus dangerous veteran with a dam. But Miguel Santos had been busy too. He brought 30 farmers and families to support what they called agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Chen organized a counter-demonstration with historical photos showing the creek in its natural state. Amanda arranged for Audubon Society and Sierra Club representatives to attend. Two competing narratives were about to collide. Veteran attacks families versus community protects water rights. The technical sabotage escalated when security footage revealed someone had poured concrete mix into the spillway channel overnight, creating a blockage designed to cause actual flooding danger if Jake opened the gates. This wasn't just harassment, it was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. Jake worked through the night with a portable jackhammer, clearing the sabotage while documenting every chunk of concrete as evidence. The metallic taste of exhaustion mixed with fury as he realized how far they were willing to go. Rick used his city council emergency powers to declare Jake's property an imminent public hazard, authorizing the fire department to secure the dangerous dam structure. Fire Chief Martinez, one of the few honest officials left in town, privately warned Jake that this was purely political. "Jake, you've got maybe 6 hours before they force me to intervene," he said. "Make it count." The insurance investigation breakthrough came at the perfect moment. Amanda's fraud reports triggered a state investigation, and the Texas Insurance Commission froze all HOA development insurance policies. Without valid insurance, the construction company faced immediate work stoppage. Financial pressure was finally hitting where it hurt. Maggie and Rick's wallets. Tony moved the EPA inspection up 24 hours due to credible sabotage reports. Federal agents were now en route, arriving at 8 a.m. If the spillway opened during their inspection, it would become federal evidence of proper water management. But Maggie's final gambit was the cruelest. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, claiming Jake had made suicide threats and needed an involuntary psychiatric hold. The VA social worker arrived at Jake's farmhouse at 5:30 a.m., just as he was preparing for the spillway operation. Jake had to convince her he was mentally competent while simultaneously preparing to flood a subdivision. Not exactly a normal Tuesday morning conversation. Sarah called from California, her voice breaking. "I can't lose my brother too. Please, Jake. This isn't what Pops would want." For a moment, Jake almost cracked. Then he found Pops' final journal entry about standing up to bullies, and his resolve hardened like concrete. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. At 7:02 a.m., with federal agents watching and the morning sun painting the sky orange, Jake opened the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound was magnificent. Not the violent rush of destruction, but the gentle whisper of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek began flowing in its original bed, exactly where nature intended. Miguel Santos knelt beside the restored creek and cupped the clear water in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face. "This is the water that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered. Maggie's reaction was immediate and predictable. She screamed at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her carefully composed morning show demeanor cracking like cheap paint. EPA agent Sarah Kim calmly explained, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." But Maggie was live streaming on Facebook, her voice rising to near hysteria. "He's flooding our children's homes." This is what happens when we let unstable veterans have weapons. Except the water wasn't flooding anything. It was flowing exactly where it belonged, in the original creek bed that her development had illegally blocked. Local news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the spillway operation live. The Austin American-Statesman reporter was interviewing downstream farmers about their restored water access when Maggie tried to hijack the interview. "This veteran is using military training to attack civilians," she shrieked. The reporter, clearly confused, asked, "Ma'am, the water is flowing in the original creek bed. How exactly is this an attack?" You could almost hear Maggie's narrative collapsing in real time. Rick was frantically calling Judge Walsh, screaming into his phone about property values and campaign contributions. "That psycho is destroying millions in property value," he yelled, apparently forgetting that Amanda was recording the conversation from the courthouse steps. Here's a legal nugget for HOA Unleashed viewers. Texas is a one-party consent state, which means you only need one person's permission to record a phone conversation, and that person can be yourself. The engineering validation was beautiful. EPA agent Kim measured the water flow and confirmed it matched historical seasonal patterns exactly. Tony Riggs documented everything. This is how the creek flowed naturally before the 2022 diversion. Federal agencies prioritized natural water flow over development convenience, and they were proving that principle in real time. Mrs. Chen's garden irrigation system filled for the first time in 18 months. 3 downstream farms reported restored water access to their stock ponds. The local diner owner brought coffee and homemade kolaches to everyone, saying, "My daddy farmed here. This is how it should be." Even some of Maggie's supporters began quietly leaving as they realized no homes were actually flooded. Turns out it's hard to maintain righteous indignation when the disaster you're protesting is just water flowing where water naturally flows. The insurance collapse accelerated when the construction company received a cease and desist order from state investigators. All work stopped on the HOA development pending the fraud investigation. Maggie discovered her own homeowner's insurance might be voided due to fraudulent water access claims. The financial house of cards was collapsing faster than a dam made of playing cards. But Maggie wasn't done fighting. She called Rick in a panic. "Get your trucks down here and block that spillway." Rick, apparently having learned nothing from the arrest of his security team, sent 3 concrete trucks to accidentally spill their loads across the creek bed. Federal agents immediately arrested the truck drivers for interfering with a federal environmental investigation. Turns out interfering with federal environmental enforcement is a felony, not a civil matter. The technical success was everything Jake had calculated. Water flow stabilized at optimal levels for agricultural and environmental needs. No flooding of residential areas. The creek stayed within its natural banks, exactly as 45 years of seasonal patterns had proven it would. Jake's Army Corps engineering had been perfect. The political fallout was swift. City Councilman Martinez arrived and publicly demanded Rick's immediate resignation. "This corruption has made our city a laughingstock," he announced to the gathered media. "You're done." Federal investigators expanded their probe to include RICO charges for systematic land fraud. Tony told Jake later, "This is the smoking gun we needed for criminal prosecution." But the sweetest moment came when Maggie realized her $2.3 million investment was now worthless without fraudulent water access. She screamed at Jake across the creek, "You've destroyed everything!" 35 families. Jake's response was calm, measured, and loud enough for every camera to catch. "No, ma'am. I restored everything. Your families can buy water rights legally, just like everyone else has to." Maggie stormed off, threatening federal lawsuits that would never materialize. As Miguel's extended family arrived with homemade tamales and cold beer, and Mrs. Chen brought a traditional Chinese tea ceremony to bless the restored creek, Jake realized something important. This was never about revenge. It was about community. The kind Pops had built one neighbor at a time, one drought at a time, one act of generosity at a time. The media narrative had shifted completely. Environmental groups hailed the spillway operation as a model for ecosystem restoration. The original Veteran Floods neighborhood story became Community Reclaims Stolen Water. Sometimes the truth flows as naturally as water finding its way home. Judge Walsh's courtroom at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media crews, farmers, HOA residents, and federal agents filled every seat, with overflow crowds watching through the windows. You could feel the electricity in the air. This wasn't just a legal hearing, it was a community reckoning. Maggie arrived with a three-piece suit army, high-powered Houston attorneys, expert witnesses, and enough legal firepower to take down a small government. She traded her tennis outfit for a conservative black dress and pearls, playing the role of concerned community leader defending innocent families. Jake showed up with Amanda, wearing a simple button-down shirt and Pops' old cowboy hat. Sometimes the best armor is just being comfortable in your own skin. The gallery was divided like a wedding gone wrong. HOA supporters on the left clutching their "Protect Our Kids" signs, farming community on the right with weathered hands and determined faces. Maggie's attorney opened with dramatic flair, presenting photos of muddy construction sites and claiming $2.7 million in flood damage from Jake's spillway operation. They wheeled in a psychiatrist who'd never met Jake, but was happy to diagnose combat revenge fantasies based on newspaper clippings. "Your Honor," the attorney declared, gesturing toward Jake like he was a war criminal, "this disturbed veteran is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He's turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The courtroom buzzed with whispers until Amanda stood for their response. She presented the 1978 Agricultural Flood Management Covenant that legally required seasonal flooding. EPA agent Kim took the stand and testified that Jake's spillway operation had restored natural water flow patterns without causing any actual property damage. Historical photographs proved current water levels matched 60 years of natural seasonal patterns. Here's your final knowledge nugget from HOA Unleashed. Legal water rights documentation always trumps recent development claims, especially when you have federal environmental agencies backing your position. Then Tony Riggs took the stand as EPA enforcement officer. His testimony was devastating. The HOA development had violated 3 separate federal environmental laws, committed systematic insurance fraud, and destroyed protected wildlife habitat. Judge Walsh squirmed in his seat as federal crimes were detailed in his courtroom. You could see him calculating whether his political loyalty to Rick was worth potential federal prosecution for obstruction of justice. The breaking point came when Amanda called Rick as a witness. Under oath, he admitted to fast-tracking zoning changes, while Jake was deployed overseas and revealed his financial stake in the construction company. When Amanda played the recorded phone conversation about destroying property values, Rick exploded. "This is a federal setup," he screamed, storming toward the exit. "We did nothing wrong." His own words captured on audio proved the conspiracy better than any prosecutor could. But the real emotional power came from community testimony. Miguel Santos described 3 generations of farming destroyed by the creek diversion, his voice breaking as he talked about his grandfather's dreams dying with the stolen water. Mrs. Chen showed photographs of her family garden, lush and green before the diversion, brown and withered after. Her quiet dignity spoke louder than any legal argument. Fire Chief Martinez testified that the spillway operation was professionally executed with 0 safety violations. Downstream property owners confirmed their agricultural water access had been fully restored. Then Maggie took the stand for what became her final performance. "He came back from war damaged, Your Honor," she said, pointing at Jake with trembling fingers. "He's taking revenge on innocent families, using psychological warfare against children." She claimed Jake had threatened her safety and described the spillway operation as environmental terrorism designed to destroy property values and traumatize residents. When Amanda called Jake to testify, the courtroom went silent. Jake presented Pops's journals documenting 40 years of community water sharing, explained his Army Corps engineering calculations, and spoke directly to Judge Walsh. "Your Honor, I didn't flood anybody. I restored a creek that was stolen from my family and this community for 45 years. The mic drop moment came when Amanda presented final evidence. Documentation of Maggie's Houston HOA paying $2.3 million in EPA fines for an identical creek diversion scheme. The federal prosecutor stood and announced a criminal investigation into interstate water fraud conspiracy. The courtroom erupted as the scope of the corruption became clear. Judge Walsh had no choice. He denied all restraining order requests, ruled that Jake's spillway operation was legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to cease all interference with federal environmental investigations. His warning to Rick was pointed. This court will not obstruct lawful federal environmental enforcement. As federal agents escorted Rick from the courthouse while banking investigators served additional warrants, Maggie found herself surrounded by reporters with nowhere to hide. She refused all comment and sped away in her BMW, probably already calling moving companies. Jake emerged to cheering crowds of farmers, environmentalists, and curious townspeople who'd witnessed justice flowing as naturally as water finding its way home. Amanda announced the federal RICO investigation at an impromptu press conference, while Miguel thanked Jake on behalf of every affected family. Jake's statement was simple. This was never about revenge. It was about doing right by the land and the people who depend on it. 6 months later, justice flowed as naturally as the restored creek. Rick Thornwell pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and got 3 years in federal prison. Maggie faced $8, $7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water, rushing through an open spillway. The construction company paid $12 million in EPA fines and got banned from all federal contract work. The HOA dissolved completely, and residents formed a new community association focused on environmental stewardship instead of suburban tyranny. Jake's property value restored to $1.2 million after the federal environmental designation made it more valuable than any suburban development could ever be. The $340,000 settlement from the insurance fraud investigation went to a good cause. Jake bought Miguel's family farm at tax auction and returned it to him debt-free. Environmental restoration often increases property values more than development ever could. The community transformation was the real victory. The restored creek now attracts ecotourism, kayaking, birdwatching, and fishing where McMansions were supposed to stand. Mrs. Chen's garden became a demonstration site for sustainable agriculture. 3 downstream farms reported their best crop yields in a decade. The local diner became unofficial headquarters for the Willow Creek Restoration Association, where farmers and environmentalists planned the next fight against corporate water theft. The environmental success exceeded every expectation. Protected Guadalupe bass populations recovered to pre-diversion levels within 4 months. The Audubon Society documented 12 bird species returning to restored wetland habitat. Texas Parks and Wildlife designated the creek as a critical wildlife corridor, ensuring permanent protection. Jake's spillway operation became a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers training manual. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job correctly. Personally, Jake found peace he didn't know he was missing. He renovated Pops's farmhouse using sustainable construction techniques, and Sarah moved back from California to help manage their growing agritourism business. Amanda and Jake? Well, let's just say fighting environmental crime together creates a pretty strong bond. The ripple effects spread across Texas like water finding new channels. Environmental groups use the Willow Creek model to challenge illegal diversions statewide. Federal agencies cite their case in new water rights enforcement guidelines. Jake became an unofficial consultant for communities fighting HOA overreach, and the phone rings constantly. They established the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship for rural students studying water management. Miguel's daughter Maria was the first recipient, and she's now studying environmental engineering at UT Austin. She wants to protect watersheds across Texas from people like Maggie. The annual Creek Days Festival celebrates restoration and community resilience with local food, environmental education, and veteran support services. They raised money for a water rights legal defense fund that's already helped 6 other communities fight back against corporate theft. Jake's favorite part: kids swimming in the creek where homes were supposed to be built, splashing in water that flows free because a community stood together. Every Sunday, Jake visits Pops' grave and brings creek water in a mason jar, just like Pops used to do when he checked the flow after heavy rains. "Thanks, Pops," Jake tells him. "The creek's singing again, just like you said it would." The Legacy Project ensures this victory lasts forever. The Willow Creek Conservation Trust now owns development rights to the entire watershed, creating a permanent buffer zone that prevents future commercial development. No one will ever steal this water again. But here's the beautiful twist. Maggie's Houston HOA faced federal RICO prosecution based on their case. 147 families across 3 states filed similar water rights restoration lawsuits. What started as one veteran's fight became a movement for environmental justice nationwide. From his porch each evening, watching that creek flow exactly where it belongs, Jake is reminded that some fights are worth everything you've got. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek, but you don't do it alone. You do it with your community, your neighbors, and people who believe clean water belongs to everyone, not just whoever has the best lawyers and the most corrupt city council connections.